Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Forstag. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Portland Business Alliance, Greater Portland Chamber of Commerce. I am not Andrew Hone. I'm the poor man's Andrew Hone, but what you lose in name recognition, you make up for in hair. And I promise that is the only dad joke I'll be dropping today. Thank you for joining us today for this event on Portland's charter reform. Today's discussion is being recorded, and the recording, along with any of the links for resources mentioned, will be available on the Alliance's website on Monday morning. Every 10 years, City Council convenes a charter commission to review and recommend amendments to the City of Portland's charter. The work of this commission helps to shape the future structure and operation of Portland's government and will have a lasting impact on the delivery of municipal services over the next decade. This moment gives us an opportunity to thoroughly examine our current government structure and take a careful look at how we can redesign our city's elections to be more fair, representative, and equitable. Together, we have a lot to consider, from alternative voting reforms to options for redrawing district lines. Our panelists today will take us through an overview of the options for districting and voting reform. My guess is that many of you will have a lot of great questions regarding this process. Feel free to share your questions by using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window. The only questions we will review will be through this tool. Please include your full name, your organization, and the location of your business when submitting your question. If you have a comment, please feel free to share it with everyone using the chat function also at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And with that, I would like to welcome today's moderator. Cindy Laurila is the Executive Director of the World Trade Center of Portland, and she is the Board Chair of Downtown Portland Clean and Safe. Cindy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon to all who are attending this discussion. Joining us for our panel today are Andrew Speer, Commissioner with the Portland Charter Commission, Debbie Kitchin, Commissioner with the Portland Charter Commission, and Julia Meier, Charter Commissioner Project Manager with the City of Portland. Like you, I'm really excited for today's discussion, and I'm now going to hand things over to the panel so they can provide us with background on this important topic.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you to PBA for the opportunity to talk about charter review. I'm going to begin with a little bit of background and context that some of you may already know, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page before I turn it over to the commissioners to talk more about the substance of our work. So what is a city charter? A city charter is a guiding document that establishes the government system and structure of the city. The charter allows Portlanders to decide how our city government is set up, how we vote for city leaders, the roles of our elected leaders, and what they are responsible for doing. The best way that I have come to understand a city charter is that it's like a constitution for a city. So it actually creates the city as a legal entity. It authorizes city powers, and it outlines the basic broad fundamentals of our city government. And charters, just like constitutions, are usually meant to be relatively short documents because amending them has a high threshold. And so the city's charter can only be amended by a vote of the people. And as Ben mentioned, our charter requires that at least every 10 years, Portland City Council appoint a charter commission whose job is to review and recommend changes to the charter. So City Council appointed this current charter commission a little bit more than a year ago in December 2020, and it had been 10 years since the previous charter review. The charter commission's job is to review and recommend changes to the charter, and that process is called the charter review process, and we're about halfway through it right now. So City Council appointed 20 Portlanders who serve as volunteers on the Charter Commission. Here's an image of our current Charter Commission. And so if we think something is not working for us, how do we make changes to our charter? So here's an image of how the commission's authority works. So like I mentioned, there's 20 charter commissioners. If 15 or more of them agree to a proposed reform, then that reform will go directly to the ballot for us as Portlanders to vote on. If a majority of charter commissioners, but less than that supermajority, agree to a proposed reform, then that reform can go to city council. And city council can sort of decide what it wants to do with it. At that point, it's not really a charter commission process anymore. City council could refer it to the ballot. They could do nothing with it. They could modify it. But again, what I think is really important to remember is that it's only by a vote of Portlanders that the charter can be changed. What is sort of unique about the Charter Commission is that during the time that the Charter Commission is impaneled, it has this authority to directly refer things to the ballot. So the normal process we experience as community members about gathering signatures to get something to qualify for the ballot is not required in this situation. Nor does City Council have any say over the Commission's recommendations, so long as a supermajority of charter commissioners agree to a reform. So here's kind of the timeline that we're working on from where we are now until December of 2022, which is when the terms of our charter commissioners expire. So last summer, the Charter Commission decided to approach charter review in 2 phases. And that kind of means 2 of everything, 2 sets of issues, 2 reports, 2 election cycles. So the first phase that we're in now is focused on 2 issues, 1, form of government, and 2, city council elections. We do intend to take on a second phase of issues, and we'd love to hear from you about what other issues beyond form of government and city council elections you'd like to see reformed. But for our phase 1 issues, those sort of red images at the top of the slide are important. So we intend for our recommendations on form of government and city council elections to be on the November 2022 ballot. In order to qualify for the November 2022 ballot, we need to do our ballot referrals no later than the first week of July. And the last slide I'll share with you before I turn it over to Commissioner Speer is our desired outcomes for charter reform. So we're not reforming for the sake of reform, right? And so the commission spent significant time articulating its desired outcomes for reform, and any potential charter reforms are going to be evaluated based on their ability to advance these outcomes. So first, a participatory and growing democracy where more voices are heard in elections. 2, an accessible and transparent government with counselors who are easy to reach. 3, a reflective government with counselors who look like the community they represent. 4, a responsive government with counselors who understand your community needs. 5, an accountable government with counselors who answer to the people. And 6, a trustworthy government with counselors who safeguard democracy. And now I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Speer. He's going to talk about kind of our current form of government, our current electoral system, and then the alternatives that we're considering.
Thank you, Julia. I'm Andrew Speer, and I serve as the co-chair of the Form of Government Committee on the Commission. This is an image of the current form of government like Portland's today. Portland is the only large city in the entire US that has a commission form of government. In the commission form of government, the mayor and commissioners share executive, legislative, administrative, and quasi-judicial authority. City bureaus are directly managed by individual commissioners or the mayor. The mayor assigns and reassigns bureaus to themselves and to city commissioners. City commissioners in charge can appoint and remove bureau directors. The mayor proposes the budget based on individual bureaus' requested budgets. The mayor and city commissioners have huge administrative roles because they directly manage bureaus. The biggest difference of power between the mayor and the city commissioners is the mayor decides which bureaus the commissioners will run. The commission spent time building understanding of our current form of government and identifying problems with our form. When evaluating our current form of government, we found that the biggest gap with our desired outcomes was the responsiveness of government where counselors understand community needs. The outcome considered things like government's ability to address complex long-term issues and to act collaboratively to respond to local issues. The two key alternative forms of government that we've been researching and considering are a mayor-council form of government and a city manager-council form of government. The mayor-council form of government, in the mayor-council form of government, the mayor is the chief executive of the city, appoints bureau directors, and hires a chief administrative officer to run and manage bureaus. The mayor also creates the first draft of the city's budget. In the mayor-council form of government, city council acts as the primary lawmaking body for the city. The city councilors would sit on different committees to develop agendas and approve the budget. In the council manager form, the city council appoints an unelected city manager. The mayor has limited executive power over implementation of the city's policies and overall has more similar power to that of city council. The mayor focuses on deciding the daily policy agenda for city council meetings and works with the city manager to draft city budget. City manager is responsible for running the city's bureaus, carrying out the laws, and helping draft the city's budget. There are a few differences that we want to highlight between the mayor council and council manager form of governments. The biggest difference between a mayor council government and a council manager government is who has most executive power. In the mayor council government, the mayor has the most executive power, whereas in the council manager government, the city manager holds this role. Another difference is who supervises the person that runs the bureaus. In the mayor council government, the mayor alone supervises the chief administrative officer, whereas in the council manager government, the city council and mayor together supervise the city manager. I will now provide an overview of our current elections. The word constituency refers to the people in the area the leader represents. In Portland, the mayor and 4 commissioners are elected at large, meaning citywide. The open seats for a commissioner are marked as positions 1 through 4, and each candidate decides which position to run for. Then voters choose only one candidate for each position. The mayor and commissioners for positions 1 through 4 are elected in presidential years, positions 1 and 4 are elected in presidential years, and the auditor and commissioners for positions 2 and 3 are elected in midterm elections. In our current voting system, candidates that receive the most votes win. A candidate might win with a majority vote over 50%, or they might win even if they get less than 50% of the votes. Portland has both a primary election in May and a general election in November. If a candidate receives a majority of the votes in the primary election, they win instantly. If no candidate wins more than 50%, the 2 candidates with the highest number of votes appear on the general election ballot. When evaluating our elections, the commission found a significant gap with 2 of our desired outcomes: a participatory and growing democracy with more voices being heard in elections, and a reflective government where councilors look like the communities they represent. So what are some of the alternatives for our city elections? One of the alternatives we are considering is dividing Portland into multi-member districts so that elected leaders can represent geographic areas of the city instead of the entire city. Multi-member districts means that more than one elected leader could represent each geographic area. A majority of commissioners prefer multi-member districts because we believe this system would help community members feel more connected to their elected leaders and increase accountability between communities and elected leaders. Because multiple leaders would represent one area of the city, this would also increase collaboration, coalition building for geographic issues between those leaders. Multi-member systems also work really well with proportional voting, which helps to give smaller communities more representation on council. The other option would be to continue electing city councilors citywide, but instead of positions, everyone would run in the same pool. In some ways, you could think of this as one large multi-member district where the district is the entire city, or the other option is a hybrid of constituencies. In a hybrid system, some councilors are elected by districts and some are elected at large or citywide. The final area we've been researching is alternative voting methods. Let me begin by saying that there are many alternative voting methods and many variations within methods. The City Council Elections Committee has begun exploring two alternatives, ranked choice voting and star voting. We recognize this doesn't yet capture the entire landscape of voting methods. As a reminder, in our current system, voters can only pick one candidate they want to represent them. This is the ballot you see on the left called Pick One. The middle is star voting and the right is choice voting. Star voting stands for score, then automatic runoff. Using star voting, voters can give the candidates a score of how much they like them using a scale of 0 to 5. So in this example, let's say you really don't like candidate Allen, so you only give them 1 star, but Bianca and Edith are your favorites, so you give them both 5 stars. Using ranked choice voting, voters can rank candidates based on how they prefer them. So in this example, let's say Jada is your top choice. So you rank her with your first choice spot. And let's say Vera is not your top choice, so you give her the 5th spot on your ballot. Using both star and choice voting, it's clear that voters get more use out of their ballot and get to express their full range of preferences of candidates. The commission has prioritized both ranked choice voting and star as options because they capture multiple preferences. They allow a decision in one election whenever voters' turnout is highest. They promote proportional system where same winners can't take all the seats. And they allow more choices at electing candidates that Portlanders can identify with. Now that you have a better understanding of our current form of government and city council elections and the alternatives we've been considering and prioritizing, we will now shift gears and talk about the commission's areas of agreement and what's next in charter review. I will now pass it to one of our commission co-chairs, Debbie Kitchin.
Debbie, you're muted. Muted here. There we go. Now I'm unmuted. All right. So let me just switch to, there we go. So the Charter Commission currently has 3 areas of agreement, and I'll share one at a time. First, the commission agrees that we should shift the constituency of city council from all at-large seats and increase the size of city council. The recommended council size varies between 6 and 20, and the number of districts between 3 and 9, and the number of councilors per district between 1 and 5. Most commissioners believe any ballot measure for districts should articulate the time, process, and some criteria for districting rather than including an actual district map. Second, the commission agrees that we should shift from the commission form of government to a form of government in which city councilors do not directly manage bureaus. The commission is relatively evenly split between preference for mayor council and council manager forms of government, with a slight preference for council manager form of government. In either alternative, city councilors can better focus on political leadership, legislating, and constituent services. For those who support council manager, reasons include that public input has favored the council manager form, increased capacity to address long-term priorities because administration and bureau management are more insulated from changing political winds, not reinventing the wheel every 4 years, and separating politics from the day-to-day business of the city. A city manager is a trained professional in city administration. The system is answerable to the whole city, not the goals of a single individual. There is better alignment of council strategy and operational implementation through the city manager, and accountability doesn't have to wait until the next election cycle. For those who support the mayor council, reasons include direct electoral accountability for a chief executive, not having an unelected city manager being completely in control of city operations without actual accountability. This council manager form seems better for smaller cities that don't need a vision for the city and accountability to that vision. The policy agenda and budget are powers of council and implementation for the executive, and it avoids the challenge of a larger city council of elected by districts co-managing a city manager. The commission is currently considering how to promote accountability in a more traditional council manager form and how to promote shared authority in the mayor council form. The roles and responsibilities we want for the mayor and councilors are just as important to articulate as the overall form. And finally, the commission agrees that we should shift to a form that allows a decision in one election and eliminates the primary, and to adopt a voting method that captures people's full range of preferences. A majority of commissioners prefer ranked choice voting, but the commission still wants to hear from more Portlanders on this topic and need to understand what public education would be needed to educate voters in the new system. So what's next for charter review? Just this week, the commission is making formal requests to the city of Portland to answer a set of questions we need and the public needs to refine our charter reforms. Impact of the reform packages we're considering, and if possible, can we calculate the potential cost savings of moving away from the commission form of government? Second, ballot measure construction. How many ballot measures are we looking at? How have other cities considered similar ballot measures? And what happens when interrelated ballot measures don't all or all fail? Third, transition. What capacity does a city need to make these transitions? What can we learn from other cities who've made similar transitions? And what is the time the city will need to implement these reforms? Fourth, geographic models. How does the city currently use geographic models in their work? This is related to our agreement to move away from at-large council seats and move to districts. And finally, intergovernmental relations. How does this reform package affect other jurisdictions? We are asking for initial responses from city bureaus by February 17th and more detailed responses by March 8th. City responses will be available to the community on the commission's website. So here's our phase 1 timeline from now through the ballot referral in early July. We plan on releasing a series of progress reports in February and March. We are working towards the March 31st commission meeting, where we will vote on which reforms to send to the attorney's office for charter language drafting. Once we have the draft charter amendment language, we will hold public hearings to receive more input from Portlanders. And finally, there are many ways for people to be involved, and we would love to have your input and engagement on charter review. So here are a number of ways. You can give verbal public comment at our full commission meetings. We spend the first 45 minutes of all our full commission meetings taking public comments, and folks can sign up in advance and are usually given 3 minutes to give public comment. You can submit written comment via email or through our online comment form. Every month, we compile all the public comments received and post them on our webpage. You can join and engage in our virtual committee meetings. We have 3 subcommittees currently: the form of government, city council elections, and community engagement. We enable the Q&A feature of Zoom during committee meetings so you can share your thoughts or questions. You can watch past recordings of our meetings. Now, anyone with insomnia, this is a good tip. They're all recorded, they're all on the website, and you can look at past meetings and kind of see the development of how we've come up with these options and discuss them. There is a monthly email update, and we'd encourage you to sign up for that, because it gives you sort of a progress, and engagement opportunities are listed there. And you can request a briefing or meeting with commissioners and staff, and there's an email there for that, charterreview@portlandoregon.gov. And we have the commissioners and staff have been out at many groups, including, for example, this presentation now, but we are going to neighborhood associations and community groups and business groups and anyone basically who is interested, because we want people to weigh in and help us in this process. So please talk to friends and family about charter review. We want as many Portlanders as possible engaged in this conversation. So please help us spread the word. And that concludes our presentation, the formal part. And so I'll turn it back to Cindy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great information. Getting into the weeds just a little bit, I got a 2-part question. What will implementation look like, and how much time, what is the cost, etc.?
I'm going to take this first, and I just have to say I love this question, and we are getting it with increased frequency from community, and I think I like it because it shows not only that folks are sort of thinking ahead towards implementation, but maybe there's some shared optimism about these reforms passing. So as Commissioner Kitchin noted in her part of the presentation, this week we did make formal requests to the city for information related to both the fiscal impact of these reforms, but also the leadership, resources, and the time that's going to be needed for the transition. We don't have those responses yet, but as we get that information from the city, we will make it available to the community. So I'd say stay tuned a little bit. But I do want to be clear that, when these reforms pass in November 2022, it's not like flipping a light switch, right? We don't get to transform our entire form of government and electoral system overnight. It is going to be a multi-year process before we fully transition. I think for elections, we're beginning to look at what is it possible to implement in the 2024 election cycle. There are some things, however, that can begin immediately after passage, right? So that could include things like, impaneling an independent districting commission that will establish the district boundaries for future council elections. It could be the city onboarding, a transition director to help manage the process. One thing I'm kind of interested in is putting together some sort of community oversight group that would help ensure that the city's implementation aligns with the spirit and the values behind the reforms. And then lastly, I'll just I think I could say this on behalf of the commission, that the commission understands and shares Portlanders' sense of urgency to really be able to see and feel change in our day-to-day lives, and will make every effort to be responsive to that.
Thank you, Julia. Andrew, Debbie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is an aspect that we are treading into the unknown with these structural changes like we were considering, but I think that part of the process is us identifying those questions that have gone to the city and then being able to see the financial outcomes. And then, you know, a lot of it revolves around the election side of how our commissioners elected, which references back to Julia's comment around the zones and identifying those through a separate process. So there is unknown, but I think what's helpful in this is that we're also making governance changes that have direct outcomes for community business. But that pathway is not a light switch, like Julia said. And so there's going to be a time of patience needed as we go into these next steps following November.
And I would also just add that other cities have done this. They've changed their form of government, or they've changed the way they do elections. And we have, you know, resources that we can call upon to sort of lessons they learned, or, you know, things that they should have avoided or looked out for. So I think we can take advantage of that and see if there are some things some paths along the way that we can avoid or take based on the experience of others. But it has happened in other cities, sometimes multiple times. Portland's been very slow to make this change. So we've got some others to look at.
Thank you. So we heard in your overview, we've gone down this path before. What's different now, and why might we see charter reform happen now when it hasn't in the past?
Well, I'll take that first. I think we are hearing a lot of support for change. You know, we have had hundreds of comments. I think we're up to 800 or something written comments, and hundreds of people that have participated in community forums. And, you know, we've had some that the commission has hosted, but we're also partnering with the Coalition of Communities of Color, and they've run a number of community-based organization listening sessions. And it's, you know, we're hearing from many different areas that we really need to do change. So I think, and we have really aggressive plans for community engagement going forward. This is something that's different this time around, that the mayor and city council have given more budget and resources to allowing us to do a lot of community engagement. And so I think that is something that will help make these things pass.
I think to add on to what Debbie mentioned, you know, for me, governance is the modality that drives change, institutional change in our city. And so when I think about the protests of 2020, I think about how do you take those issues that were being raised and then effectuate that into change? And for me, it was charter review. And so I'm hoping that Portlanders are able to connect those dots through time as we go through the remainder of our process till November, in understanding that through a governance change, although it doesn't seem all that exciting on the surface, it's having outcomes for community and being responsive to issues, addressing issues before they become issues for community, and being more agile for community needs. And so I'm hoping that that's the vision that others see in this process. But in terms of why now, I don't know that there's one singular answer. I'm hoping that it's through education and intentionality. I know that our commission as a driving force has been involved in educating and engaging with community in a little bit different way than efforts past. And so I'm hoping that that has some aspects of outcome for us that are positive and with regards to change. But for me, a lot of it just goes back to continuing to educate community and engage with them to see this change through.
I really appreciate being able to answer this question though, Cindy, because we do get it a lot. And I think the more I've thought about it, I think I actually disagree with the premise that like we've been down this road before. Like, I'm not actually sure that we have, you know, this current charter commission review is only the third substantive review in 100 years. There was one in 1922, one in 2007, and this one. And like Commissioner Speer said, I feel confident, though I wasn't around in 1922, that this is probably the most community-driven of any in our history. I think second, you know, some of the attempts at reform that we're talking about were so long ago that not even all Portlanders who have the right to vote today could vote them. And the idea of like drawing parallels between those efforts is challenging to me. And then I think third, you know, the handful of efforts that happened from sort of like the late 50s through the 2000s all held their votes in low turnout May elections. And I think our charter commission prioritized the November 2022 ballot precisely because it is the election that's going to have the highest turnout during the time the commission is impaneled. And I think that's reflective of the values of this charter commission, right? That believes that the most Portlanders possible should get to weigh in on these important decisions for our community. And then lastly, you know, we have looked at these past efforts. I think we've learned, you know, what we can from them, but we're not focused on the past, right? Like we're looking, I think, to figure out the government that Portlanders believe will work for us now and into the future.
Thank you. So why should the business community pay attention to this? I mean, there's some obvious answers here, but most importantly, how can they be involved in this process? And I know, Debbie, you've touched on a few things, but I think we could expand.
Yeah, I was asked this same question in the Business Journal article that came out. You know, and I think where my is business should care because in the same well, what I said in the article was that there is no distinguishment between, we're looking at how the city serves the community, and part of the community is the business community. And so I don't see it necessarily as us as constituents and then us as business community, as much as we all are the community and we want to engage with our city and receive services that we both need and in a timely manner. And so I see the cross-section with the business community being a huge advocate with regards to as we head into the campaign of whatever our final recommendation is, needing a strong presence and understanding of how the outcomes of what we're proposing will have cascading effects into our communities to include business. But I focus in on the shared outcomes that Julia presented earlier. That's really what has been our guiding light in wanting to ensure that whatever structure we propose, it's achieving those outcomes for community and community to include business.
Yeah, and I'd say that's great, Andrew. I really agree with everything you said, and feel that there is an important role for the business community in helping us get the word out about this. In spite of the community engagement efforts that we've had, it's still not a majority of Portlanders who will hear about this, and we need to have, you know, and we're as a commission, we're all public officials. We can educate people about what's in these charter amendments, but we're not advocates for it. That is an inappropriate role for us. So if the business community and others who have shared support for these amendments can be those advocates. And, I think we're going to need people like that, because our role as commissioners is to provide information, how we came to these recommendations, what the background information is, but it's all information. So we really need others to step up and carry that advocacy as we get closer to the amendments. And then, of course, helping us craft these amendments in terms of your input is critical. We've heard so many comments about we need to change the form of government, but not nearly as many about which form of government we want. Similarly with elections, we've heard lots of general comments, but now we're getting to the specifics of the recommendations. And so we really want your feedback and opinions and wisdom to share with us, as with all the rest of the community, about the specific things that we're looking at, so that they can be part of the amendments that are referred to voters.
I feel like you covered most of it. But I think I can make a connection between Commissioner Speer and Commissioner Kitchen's comments, and actually the comment I see in the chat right now around permitting, for example. So I do think, like Commissioner Speer said, one of our desired outcomes for charter reform is a more participatory and growing democracy, where more voices are being heard. And I really do hope that that is a shared vision that all of us support, no matter what sector we represent. That being said, I don't think the current structure is conducive to Portlanders trying to engage with the city or companies trying to conduct business with the city, right? And I think my needs as an individual Portlander, your needs as a business, don't usually fit neatly into individual bureau structure, right? And even if your needs happen to fit into some sort of individual bureau structure, that bureau likely has inconsistent management and supervision. And someone dropped in the chat something about, coordinating permitting. So, right, we currently have in the city, like I think a 30-something member permitting task force, right, that has 2 city council members, like representatives from 7 bureaus that are involved in permitting in the city to try to improve those practices. And while I'm glad that there is such a body meeting to try to make those improvements, we shouldn't have to create like new structures and new bureaucracies in the city as sort of workaround band-aids to the silos that are institutionalized by the commission form of government. And I can say, like, I'm relatively a new city employee. I came to work on charter review, and even something I think is important as charter review doesn't really have a home in the city structure, because charter review is a citywide effort and everything in the city is structured in this bureau specific way. So I do think working on that coordination, getting out of these silos of individual bureaus does positively impact the business community. And then finally, I'll just echo what Commissioner Kitchin was saying, is that, there's so many engagement opportunities that she went through in her presentation. I would encourage you to take advantage of those, to share those opportunities with your employees or other business networks you're in, and just talk to folks. Like, I really believe that kind of word of mouth and all of us talking to people that we know about charter reform is the only path to our success.
Well, I concur with what's going on in the chat. Thank you so much for your efforts and for working on this important topic, truly. Any closing thoughts before we move to Q&A session?
I think for me, what inspires me in this work is that it's really driving structural change and institutional change, and the outcomes of that and the significance of that, I think, is really important when we think about generations to come and how those generations receive and get service in an equitable way. And I think for myself, I live in outer East Portland. It's never felt connected to the city, and I think being able to have places like East Portland feel connected as part of a community is a really important outcome, both for business and community members alike. And so I'm inspired by that and hope that people are able to find what inspires them about charter reform and how they can connect with it to drive change for our community.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Andrew totally. But also what Julia was saying just earlier about the silos, we can't tackle our biggest problems if we're operating in silos. And we all know what those are, you know, climate change, homelessness, housing crisis. There's public safety, there's so many areas. And if we're in silos and not working effectively, we can never tackle those problems or even make progress. So it is inspiring to work on this and hope that it is a long-term play. You know, it's something that we're setting in place for structural change, but hopefully for in the future, this will pay benefits for how our city can respond to these critical issues.
Well, thank you again. And I would like to pass it back to Ben for some Q&A.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Andrew, Julia, and Debbie, for this very interesting conversation about the future of our city that we all love so much. We have a little bit of time here for some questions from the audience. I'm going to try to hit up as many of them as I can. The first one comes from Jill Mackey, great member, Vigor. Thank you for joining us, Jill. Her question is, are there examples of which cities nationally have adopted the different forms of government and election management? And is there any data on how those cities believe those systems are working or not working?
You know, we have asked this very question, and there are, I mean, across cities, we had a presentation from some experts on local government and who have done these kinds of studies, and across cities across the country, you know, are almost evenly split between the mayor council and the council manager form of government. I mean, there's a slight slighter greater number of the where the city managers are involved, but it still is split, and it's very hard to find empirical evidence that shows one method or one form is superior to the other form. There are so many other conditions, size of the city, region of the country, you know, issues that those cities are dealing with that make it difficult to find evidence, you know, in a sort of empirical way. But we are encouraged that that we have a lot of examples to look to for different ways within these two forms to organize the form of government.
Thank you, Debbie. Along those lines, Michelle, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, Michelle. I apologize, but I know you're with Harsh. She asks, what input would the public have in the critical selection of the city manager, should that option be chosen?
Yeah, I think we're, well, I think we're in that stage of identifying what that would and wouldn't look like if we are to choose that form. You know, I can just speak for some of my thoughts on it. It's going down aspects of committees, whether that be a partial with council members or and public. So that there's different stages of that form that could take, and then also around goal setting for the manager. If it was a city manager, how, you know, there's aspects of being able to have public process around that that could look like committees as well. But happy for Julia to answer too.
No, I mean, I think, you know, when Commissioner Kitchin was kind of talking about the commission's current thinking on form of government, there does seem to be a concern with the council manager form of government having this sort of unelected city manager outside of like the reach of the accountability of the electorate. And so commissioners have been considering, like, how do you promote accountability and public accountability tied to a more like traditional council manager form of government structure? And I think there's a multitude of ways one can do that, but one of the primary ways the commissioners have identified is how do you have roles for Portlanders related to the job of a city manager. So I don't think it could be like helping actually draft the job description. It could be participating in the hiring process. It could be participating in the annual review or more frequent review process, right? Setting goals for the position. So I think that is not done in many jurisdictions. And I do think it's a possibility in a city like Portland to consider, like, how do we have Portlanders in general involved in all aspects of the city manager, like hiring, review, recommendations about changing something about their position. So all of that's on the table.
Thank you. The next question comes from John Sealing with the Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors. John asks, how much conceptually has to be agreed to by the committee to get on the ballot? And can a general idea be put forward and then specifics get decided downstream?
Yeah, I'll take, yeah, you're right. It would be, I mean, no, we will have specific amendment language for the charter, and that's what voters will vote on. Now, there is, you know, that for in the case of, say, the districting, that's an example where we would outline a process that would be a charter amendment for that process. And so some of the work will happen later after the vote, but the outlining the process and who gets to appoint the districting commission and things like that will be specific amendment language that will be voted on by the voters, because we can't make any changes to the charter without a vote by the voters.
Thank
The
you.
only thing I would add is, like, you know, interestingly, our charter does not prescribe much about the charter review process, but one of the things it does prescribe is we have got to have a public hearing process before the commission takes any final votes on ballot referrals. And that public hearing process itself has requirements, and it requires that the public have notice of the actual drafted charter amendment language, along with a sort of quote unquote neutral description of the meaning and purpose of the charter reforms. And all of that work is done by the city attorney's office.
Julia, I knew your answer to that question before I was even halfway done, just based on your head gesture. The final question we have here is from Gerard Milner, who I believe is with Portland State. His question is, do any of the options for structuring the council, are any of them more likely to prevent councilors from becoming vessels for NIMBY causes in terms of kind of having a bigger picture of city governance?
I think one of the issues that we have looked at is when you have a city council that's made up of all district representatives, you know, there is that risk that that, you know, they they don't take a citywide view on issues and are really focused just only on their district. But I think we've also looked at cities where that hasn't been as much of an issue. And I think some of the I've read some articles that reviewed, you know, some NIMBY sort of behavior related to housing. And, you know, people not wanting to have multifamily housing in their district and therefore putting more roadblocks in that. But I think times are different now. People are very aware of what our housing crisis has cost us. And I don't think there's as much opposition to multifamily throughout neighborhoods. We have state laws that prevent some of that NIMBY sort of behavior in housing that has some areas of the country have suffered from in the past when they've moved to districts. So I think there are safeguards we can put in that that would prevent some of those things from happening.
I think on this issue too, someone made a comment to me the other day and said, you know, regardless of district lines or any lines, there's still backyards everywhere. And so And I think you can see that demonstrated through like how housing density and where available land is today. I think of the development that I see out where I live, and it's high density nature versus other parts of the city. And so I do think as a commission, we're considering that hybrid alternative. I think it was on the second to last slide that I presented, where we're thinking about, well, is there areas that we could look at where it's partial district? Some of the council is made up of district representations, and then some are at large. Think of your many school districts are set up like that for their count or for their boards. So I think that the NIMBY thing is good to be aware of, but I think NIMBYism already plays itself out in our policies with today in many aspects of our city.
Well, and I would also say that so many of the issues that we deal with, you can't confine them to one area. That, there's just like even the city of Portland is part of a broader region. All of these things affect people, whether it's right specifically in their area or not. So I think, we need to be, I think people are becoming more aware of that. You can't isolate problems to a certain geographic area because they're going to spill over to the whole city and have an impact on the whole city.
I want to address, I think the NIMBYism was maybe covered. I will just share, and I think I saw this earlier in the chat, kind of questions about, what we've been hearing so far from community. And we have heard from many, many people. And when you get to hear it all and intake it all, there is overwhelming support for district-based elections. I mean, it comes like anywhere I go, very different communities, very different spaces. Portlanders are asking for that. And it's this feeling like, I have no idea who's responsible for what, and I just want to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody. It's like a constituent services request. And we hear that so much that it's hard to ignore, right? So like, if we're going to do district-based elections, I think this question about NIMBYism is important, right? So like, how do we structure them or structure our overall form of government in a way to mitigate the risks while still providing Portlanders what they're asking for?
Thank you so much for that answer. We could continue talking about this for a long time, and I know the folks on this panel will be talking about this for a long time. Unfortunately, for today's presentation, we have run out of time. If we did not get your question, rest assured we will make sure we copy that down and send it to the folks on the panel so it can be answered offline. I want to thank you all for joining us today and informing us on this really important topic. Thank you. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be available. The major motion studios always release their things on Friday evening. We're a little bit slower, so it'll be Monday morning when you get this recording. And as we mentioned earlier, we will continue to share updates on this and other breaking news on our social media and website. I would also like to invite you all to join us for our next February forum event. It is on the 16th of February, and it is focused on the state of the Portland economy. So more good information there. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, and I hope you all have a great weekend.